Yes, we're going back to Volcus today with the other section of the Kill Team Hivestorm box, the Tempestus Aquilons. And for these guys, I'm going to be taking inspiration from the Helghast from Killzone, the Troopers from Jinro, even the Combine from Half-Life. So this color scheme is going to have a lot of blacks in it, and to start off, I'm just priming in black. This is the black primer from Pro Acryl, and as always, you could totally use a spray can for this. And then I'm going to go in with a dark grey. This is from AK. And I'm just going to spray this from above very quickly. I don't want to tone the whole miniature grey. I just want some highlight from above. And then a quick dry brush of some neutral grey, which is just a shade brighter than the dark grey. And what this is doing is just pulling out those details and adding almost like a natural highlight. I'm switching over to field grey because I want to just break up all these sections of black and grey. I don't want it to just be monotone with some red eyes. So I'm adding some very subtle colours to some of the areas of the troopers, not only to help break up the silhouette a little bit, but also just to kind of give them some variation and some interest. And here I'm using a rainy grey. This is a much warmer grey tone than the blues, the cool blues that we've been using for the dry brushes already. And I'm using this rainy grey for all the straps and the details on the Aquilons. The idea is that I want to stay true to the Killzone Helghast type inspiration, but I still want to be able to break up the silhouette in places and kind of add my own twist on it. We're also at a fairly early stage that I can still afford to clean up with some of those base colours if I make a mistake. I'm using Rhinox hide for any of the leather pouches, the leather straps that are on the Aquilons. Again, I don't want to pull too much detail away from the overall colour scheme, but I just want to add a little pop of colour here and there to some of the characters. Here on the Grenadier, for example, I'm using this for all of his grenade pouches. Next up, I'm using MiG Productions Dark Wash. This is an enamel wash. You can see it just completely soaks into the miniature. I'm just going for an overall wash. It sounds a little counterintuitive to prime them grey and then add a wash on top. But what I'm hoping to do is just get a nice brown shadow in some of those recesses. It also helps to warm up some of the greys that we've been using, for example, on the dry brushing. And because the enamels take a long time to dry, at this stage I'm going to get the bases prepped. So I'm going to be mimicking the same bases that I did for my Stingwing videos. And that is just a Vallejo kind of paint texture. And then I just place some debris in there and kind of smush it in and then let that dry. And now I'm switching over to Bold Titanium White. And I'm using this just for those dots on the eyes. They've also got like a headlamp on the side of the helmet, which I'm also doing in the same style. And this is just to kind of prep for the fluorescent paints that we'll be using. I'm using a bright neutral grey. I'm being kind of lazy. You can just mix this up with the neutral grey and the white, but I'm using this to highlight all of the sections of trim and any of the instruments on the gauntlets. I could have done these a shade darker, but I wanted to just highlight that trim and make it really pop against the black. I'm using this same color for all of the details on the helmet and just taking my time, being extra careful not to get it on the existing colors. Luckily, some of the sculpt is raised enough that you can just use the side of your brush. And then I use coal black to tidy up any of the areas of mistake if I just overspill. I'm using a mixture of fluorescent red and fluorescent orange, and I'm just getting this on the eyes. With the white undercoat underneath, this makes this really vibrant. I'm also just gently overspilling around the eyes because I deliberately want those eyes to glow on that black that's around there. I then mixed in just a dab of white to make a kind of highlight color, and I'm just doing a quick dot in the upper section of those lenses. And because this is the most vibrant color on these models, it really does pop. I'm adding a few highlights to the green from earlier, And I don't want to go too bright on these highlights because I don't want to make the models break away from that black silhouette. For the areas of trim, I'm using a white as sparingly as possible, just to kind of add a bright highlight, a non-metallic highlight, if you will, to the areas of trim. And then a neutral gray just to kind of add a shadowy area to that as well. I'm prepping the bases exactly the same way I did for the sting wings. This is a neutral gray, followed by Coelia Greenshade, and I'm trying to match the playmat that comes in the Hivestorm box, the Volcus kind of terrain, as close as possible. By getting the bases all to this point, it's kind of showing me that maybe the models are a little too dark. So I decided to go in with some rust gray and just kind of sponge on some highlights. You could do this as a dry brush. I want it to be just a little bit more accurate and just kind of add a little bit of weathering to these metallic plates that they're wearing. And also by introducing that blue, it kind of just brings it back to a small amount of color. I want to add just a little bit more of an edge highlight, and this is Leadbelcher. I'm not trying to cover up the rust gray that I just used, I'm just trying to add kind of a sheen to the armor and make it look more metallic. It's a bit weird to have non-metallic trim with metallic paints, but I just wanted to add just a little bit of weathering to these metallic sections. And then finishing out the bases with a rust grey dry brush, followed by a fairly light white dry brush as well. I'm not looking to cover the whole base. Lastly, the playmat has sections of brown in there, so I'm just using a Seraphim Sepia wash and just dabbing on a couple of drops of this just to kind of add some variation. Here's Castellan green, and I'm using this to highlight some of the grenades on the Grenadier. Now we're starting to get into those operatives that have individual details, and so I'm just going around and just highlighting some of these features that these operatives have. The main feature on the precursor is the dagger, and so I'm using this green to highlight the scabbard. Here I'm using a Baharroth blue, and I'm going to be using this for the plasma on the gunner. One of my favourite things to do in Warhammer is to paint the object source lighting from the weapons. And so this is just an initial coat here, and I'm not looking to cover up the white around the edges, just to kind of get the top section of this gun. And then I'm switching over to a sky blue, which is a little bit darker, and I'm using this to kind of imply that the middle of this section is a little cooler than the edges. Finally, I'm mixing a little bit of that black into the sky blue, and I'm using this for a glow coming off of that section. And then I'll use this for the panels around the gun and the sides of his face. Here's a birch color, and I'm using this for the skull on the servo turret. I was toying with the idea of magnetizing all the guns, but I decided just to commit to an option here. Also, all of the colors that we've used so far for the troopers I've applied to the servo sentry. And then a Seraphim Sepia wash on top of that birch helps it look more like bone. And I'm using Bugman's glow as the flesh colors on the gunfighter's face. I went with this option because it's a guy wielding 2 pistols, and he kind of reminds me of somebody.
12 shots.
So yeah, I had to sneak a Metal Gear Solid reference in there somewhere. I'm using the bright neutral grey for the eyes, just carefully adding a quick dot on some of those eyes. And then going in with a black just to try to get a pupil, and you can always tidy up with the original Bugman's glow. I'm introducing pink flesh as a highlight color, and so I'm mixing this into the Bugman's glow and then applying it in stages until I'm using just pure pink flesh as highlights. Once I'm happy with those highlights, I'll then introduce a little bit of that birch color and just add my final highlights on the cheeks and the nose. Again, you don't want to add too much birch because they end up looking a little pale, but just a little dab here and there on the end of the nose and the chin, for example, just really helps add some dimension to the face. Next up, I'm using a Baneblade brown, and I'm just using this as a hair color just for the back of the head and the sideburns. Finally, I'm using Mephiston Red for his beret. I've mixed in a little bit of black initially as a base color, and I'm using this all over. And then what I'll do is I'll build up to that Mephiston Red in a couple stages, exactly the same way I did the faces. And that finishes out Revolver Ocelot. And because I switched heads from the commander to the gunfighter, I decided to paint one more face for my leader. And this guy also looks a little familiar as well.
I say, what are you doing way out here, old chap?
Yes, every time I saw this face, I couldn't help but think Captain Ash from Timesplitters 3. So I'm taking exactly the same approach I did with Revolver Ocelot a minute ago, and just doing the same colors, building up to those flesh tones, building up to that birch highlight. There's a little bit more surface area to play with here, so I'm just taking my time and blending those seams between the two colors. And then once those final birch highlights are applied to the cheeks and the nose, I'll then use that same Baneblade brown for his mustache. And then I introduced just a little bit of rust grey into the pink flesh, and I'm just applying this around the back of his head and his sideburns, as if to say he's balding, maybe he's an older Captain Ash. And then lastly, I'll finish out all of the models with a black rim. And there we have it, the Tempestus Aquilons, finishing out the Hivestorm box. I've still got the terrain to do, so if you're interested, let me know. That would be kind of a fun project to do. There's a lot of terrain in that box. Overall, I'm really happy with the way these guys came out. I think there's a few things that I probably could have done more, but because it's such a big team, I really wanted to make a quick and achievable color scheme. Painting pure black can always be a little bit boring, so I always like to introduce a small amount of color, exactly the same way I would paint white. So I guess my question is, what's my next kill team? Let me know in the comments below which kill team you'd like to see me paint next. If you haven't already, check out the Stingwing video. It's a really fun way to paint these models. And if you've enjoyed this content, please feel free to subscribe, like the video, and as always, I will see you all in the next one.